What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are hopping into our starts and sits for the tight end position for Week 6 of the 2022 fantasy football season. If you guys do enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way in. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. It really does help us out if you guys hit that like button and consider subscribing, and feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let's hop into today's video. All right, Thursday night football, we got the Commanders at the Bears. At the time that I prepared all these slides for today's video, Logan Thomas still had a chance to play, and I did put an asterisk next to his name in case he was out, and regardless, I had him as a sit. With all that being said, he will miss Week 6. He will miss this matchup against the Bears with a calf injury. Really, I don't see any reason to start any of the tight ends on the Washington Commanders team, so we'll move right along. Any Washington Commanders tight ends are going to be sits for me here in Week 6. All right, KMET is coming off of his best fantasy performance of the season at 8.5 fantasy points in full PPR against the Minnesota Vikings. He had 4 targets, 4 receptions, and 45 receiving yards. And even with the Washington Commanders looking pretty abysmal on the defensive side of things, I'm still going to sit KMET here in Week 6. I just don't have faith in KMET, but I will say that the Bears and Justin Fields looked much improved last week, at least in terms of passing the football, so maybe there's something to keep an eye on here, but at the moment I'm still sitting KMET moving into Week 6. All right, moving on to Sunday's slates. We've got the Ravens at the Giants. Mark Andrews is your tight end 2 in fantasy football, even with having just 3.5 points in Week 4, but Week 5 reminded us why we keep Mark Andrews in our lineups on a weekly basis. He had 22.9 points against Cincinnati in Week 5, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 89 receiving yards, and a touchdown. An absolutely amazing fantasy day. And here in Week 6, there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to consider sitting Mark Andrews. He's a start on a weekly basis. All right, we're going to sit Daniel Bellinger of the New York Giants, but it is worth noting he had 10.4 fantasy points, 3 targets, 2 receptions, 22 receiving yards, and a rushing touchdown. So maybe some usage coming for this tight end on the New York Giants, but I'm just not confident enough. We haven't seen anything consistent on the season for Bellinger. But realistically, for majority of fantasy owners, we're not going to consider starting Bellinger here in Week 6. All right, Jaguars at Colts. I think Evan Ingram on the Jacksonville Jaguars is a really solid stream here in Week 6 against the Indianapolis Colts, who have not been playing too well against the tight end position. And Ingram had 12.9 fantasy points against Houston Texans in Week 5, his best fantasy performance of the season. 10 targets, 6 receptions, 69 receiving yards. But outside of that performance, he only has one other double-digit fantasy performance on the season. And guess what? It was Week 2 against the Colts. So I like his odds here in Week 6 facing the Colts. Again, I think we could see another solid stat line, and hopefully we see Ingram find the end zone. On the other side of things, the Indianapolis Colts definitely have some tight ends that are getting usage, but it's just not consistent across the board. And really in Week 5 against the Denver Broncos, we didn't see any of those tight ends shine at all. So Mo Alley-Cox, Jelani Woods, and Kylan Granson all going to be sits for me. Moving into Week 6, we just don't have a consistent enough sample size. We don't have a consistent enough pattern to consider any of the Colts tight ends moving into the week. All right, Patriots at Browns. Man, oh man, my guy Hunter Henry having his best fantasy performance of the season so far at 9.4 fantasy points against the Detroit Lions, one of the worst defenses in the league. 5 targets, 4 receptions, 54 receiving yards. Listen, man, I'm all for keeping an eye on Hunter Henry, but I'm not going to have the confidence to start him against the Browns in Week 6. It was nice to see an actual performance out of Henry on the season, but there's no real reason to consider him moving into Week 6. David Njoku, on the other hand, has given us some pretty solid stat lines over the last 3 weeks, reading at 23.9, 9.7, and 14.8 over the last 3 weeks. And the Patriots, although they've improved over the last week or so, are still in the bottom 12 in the league against opposing tight end. So I like Njoku in this matchup. I think we can be confident in starting him. He is your tight end 8 in full PPR at this point in the season. So I'm good with Njoku here in week 6. All right, Bengals at Saints. If Hayden Hurst is healthy, which he is questionable at the moment with a groin injury, you start him. Listen, Hayden Hurst, 2 touchdowns in his last 2 games, at least 11 fantasy points in his last 2 games. He's your tight end 11 so far on the season. Not a very good ceiling potential here, but I like him against the Saints. I think he's a solid enough start at a position that we don't always have a lot of options at. So I think Hayden Hurst is actually a really good start if you don't have better options here in week 6. Looking at Taysom Hill, I'm still considering Taysom Hill a streaming option. He's your tight end 7 in full PPR. He's your tight end 3 in standard. I get it, guys. A 34-point performance against Seattle in week 5. And listen, at the end of 2021, right, Hill was very consistent, although he was a quarterback, right? He wasn't a tight end. So right now he's in this hybrid role, and I love seeing him thrive in it, but I just would not expect a 34-point performance against the Bengals here in week 6. Kind of tamper your expectations if you're going to start Taysom Hill. If you have a tight end who's on bye this week, like a Darren Waller, if you own Dalton Schultz, whatever it may be, you're a little bit concerned at the position, maybe Kyle Pitts, who might miss this week, whatever it may be. I get it, guys. Taysom Hill is a solid option, but we have to expect some inconsistency overall, and we've seen this happen in the past with Taysom Hill, right? So all I'm saying is I'm considering him a streaming option, but I do think he is a good streaming option here in week 6. All right, Buccaneers at Steelers. No reason whatsoever to talk about the Buccaneers tight ends. They're all going to be sits. We haven't seen anyone step up and emerge as a fantasy option within that offense. Pat Freiermuth continues to be a start for me, but he has been limited at practice throughout the week so far, dealing with a concussion and currently in concussion protocol. So he gets the asterisk, but I do think Pat Freiermuth is good to go on Sunday. We do have him in our starting lineups. Buccaneers are actually at the bottom of the league in terms of facing opposing tight ends in fantasy football, and Freiermuth still comes in as your tight end 10 in full PPR, even with a bad performance in week 5 overall against the Buffalo Bills. So I'm not worried about Freiermuth, even with the change at the quarterback position. I think that Kenny Pickett's going to be in a lot of game scripts. He's going to be in one this weekend where he has to throw the football because the Steelers are going to be playing from behind. So Freiermuth is good to go. He's still in my starting lineup moving into week 6. All right, Niners at Falcons. Listen, I'm starting George Kittle. Okay, I get it. He's been extremely disappointing since he's been on the field in week 3. He missed the first 2 games of the season, right? And yeah, he's been extremely disappointing. No more than 7.7 fantasy points in full PPR so far on the year. But the Falcons have been really, really bad against opposing tight ends. So I'll give Kittle a chance here. And this is another week where we're down a couple of players overall with the bye weeks. So I think if you own Kittle, you roll the dice here. If he doesn't perform against Atlanta, then we can officially start to panic on Kittle. But I say we give him one more shot. All right, Kyle Pitts has been limited with a hamstring injury throughout the week at practice, and I'm sitting Kyle Pitts because I don't like this game script for the Atlanta Falcons. Even if he does play, I think the Niners defense is going to have themselves a day, and they've been playing good against the tight end position. And let's face it, man, if you're a Kyle Pitts owner right now, you're in absolute shambles. You are looking at streaming options. You are absolutely worried, or you've already traded Pitts away. I don't like him here in week 6, all things considered. All right, Jets at Packers. Man, Tyler Conklin moving back to tight end 13 on the season. He gave us a true goose egg in week 5, 1 target, 0 receptions. It does not look like Zach Wilson and Conklin exactly have the best chemistry. I still think we keep an eye on Conklin. If he's been dropped in your league, keep an eye on the production we get here. There's a chance he bounces back against Green Bay. He did enough in week 4 against Pittsburgh with 8.2 fantasy points to give us some confidence moving forward with Zach Wilson at the quarterback position. But then the week 5 performance is absolutely spooked Tyler Conklin owner. So I would sit Conklin this week. I do agree with that, but keep an eye on him. Let's see what happens overall. All right, Robert Tonyan, on the other hand, is going to be a sit for me. He's always a tight end you can consider streaming, but he's just 110% touchdown dependent. Outside of week 4, where he did score his only touchdown on the season, he has not had a single double-digit fantasy performance on the year. His next best mark was week 3 against Tampa Bay, where he had 9.7 points. He did that off of 6 receptions and 37 receiving yards. So overall, I just don't think Tonyan is consistent enough to be considered a start. If you're in a deeper league, you're absolutely desperate, sure, you can roll the dice, because if he scores, well, he's gonna have a respectable fantasy stat line, but outside of that, I don't see a very productive day from a fantasy perspective for Tonyan here in week 6. Vikings at Dolphins. I think Irv Smith is a solid stream on the week because the Dolphins have not played well against the tight end position so far on the season. He gave us 8.2 fantasy points last week in full PPR. Nothing crazy here. Listen, he's not my favorite stream, but I do think that he holds some value, especially in full PPR leagues and deeper leagues overall if you're desperate at the position. He's only given us double-digit fantasy points once on the season, similar to Robert Tonyan, who we just talked about, right? If Irv Smith does not find the end zone, he's not going to give you a great fantasy stat line. So I like him because of the matchup overall, but that's really just about it. I really only like Irv Smith if you don't have better options over. All right, Mike Gesicki, man, we don't know who's going to be the quarterback. There's a strong chance that the quarterback for the Miami Dolphins on Sunday is Skylar Thompson. And actually, I'm reading reports right now that that is the plan, that Teddy Bridgewater and Tua are both going to be sitting, and Skylar Thompson's your quarterback, so that says enough. I don't have the trust that Thompson to Gesicki is going to be a real factor when we haven't even seen Tua or Bridgewater be a factor with Gesicki outside of week 2 against Baltimore, where everyone was a factor in that game, right? So I will sit Mike Gesicki. Don't get me wrong, you can always argue that the backup quarterback needs a security blanket. It could be Gesicki, but until we see that on the field, we're absolutely sitting Mike Gesicki here in week 6. Panthers at Rams. No reason to talk about the Panthers tight ends. We haven't seen anything pop up in terms of consistency there from a fantasy perspective. And really, I think this Rams defense is going to have themselves a day. I'm really not confident in the Panthers offense outside of CMC at the moment. So we'll move right along. Tyler Higbee continues to be a start, coming in as tight end 6 in full PPR, 11.6 points in week 5. 7 receptions, 46 receiving yards, especially if you play in full PPR. Higbee is a week in, week out start for you. He is technically questionable at the moment, but I'm pretty confident he'll be good to go from what I've read. So he is a start on a weekly basis. There's no doubt about it. Our Cardinals at Seahawks. You continue to start Zach Ertz on a weekly basis. You're tight end 4 in fantasy. 10.8 points in week 5, 6 receptions, 48 receiving yards, similar to Tyler Higbee, who we just talked about. You're starting Ertz on a week in, week out basis. Ertz continues to be productive, and I love this matchup versus Seattle. This could be one of his best fantasy stat lines on the year, so no question about it. Get Ertz in your starting lineup. On the other hand, Will Dissly, I think, is a really strong streaming option moving into week 6. He moved back from tight end 10 to tight end 12, going from week 4 to 5, but overall, even with just 4.1 points in week 5, just 2 receptions, 21 receiving yards, the Cardinals have played very poorly against the tight end position so far on the season. So I think with the 3 touchdowns through the first 5 games of the year and the matchup overall, if you don't have a better option, go take a look at Will Dissly. He's only rostered in 17% of fantasy leagues. He's a really strong streaming option, and what I think should be a good little shootout between Kyler Murray and Geno Smith here in week 6. All right, Bills at Chiefs. I'm sitting Dawson Knox. He's technically questionable. He missed week 5, but overall, guys, I mean, I think Dawson Knox is a player we have to move on from. He's not a player even worth rostering, and it pains me to say because Knox is one of my favorite late round tight ends to target in fantasy drafts going into the season, but we just have not seen that production that we saw last year out of Knox so far on the year. Finished as tight end 8 in PPR last year. He's sitting as tight end 27 PPR so far on the season. So Knox not a factor for me whether he's healthy or not. Don't get me wrong, if you're a part of the Buffalo Bills offense, you always have a chance to score, but I'm not going to risk it here in week 6. Travis Kelce is an absolute animal. He's a big bad man amongst boys, right? I mean, 33.5 fantasy points in week 5, 7 receptions for 25 receiving yards. It's 3.1 1.3 yards per catch, but 4 touchdowns. 4 touchdowns for Travis Kelce in week 5. We all saw it, right? This is your tight end 1 in full PPR. There's no doubt about it. Kelce's in your starting lineups. We're not going to waste any time on it. Don't think twice about it. He's in your starting lineups here in week 6. All right, Cowboys at Eagles. What in the world is going on with Dalton Schultz? He has practiced in limited fashion, dealing with a knee injury so far here in the week, but with 3 straight goose eggs in fantasy football and a 0.8 performance in week 2, we've seen no production out of Schultz. I mean, he's getting dropped in a lot of leagues, and this is another tight end. It was essentially drafted as a tight end 5 on average in fantasy drafts and has given us little to no production. He's your tight end 49 right now on the season. Listen, I do think if Schultz comes back and is fully healthy, and when Dak is back and fully healthy, that same chemistry could emerge, so keep an eye on Schultz. But in most leagues right now, there's just no reason to roster Schultz unless you're, undefeated and you have the extra roster spots. So Schultz will be a sit in a tough matchup against the Eagles for me here in week 6. Dallas Goedert, on the other hand, is your tight end 5 in full PPR. So my 1 late round tight end who I got right so far on the season. 17.5 fantasy points in full PPR in week 5. 8 receptions, 95 receiving yards. He's doing very, very well with yards after the catch. He looks great out there, and we want pieces of this Eagles offense on our starting rosters. He continues to be a sit even against a tough Cowboys defense here in week 6. All right, the game we've all been waiting for, the Broncos at the Chargers. Another week, another beautiful primetime game for the Denver Broncos. There's no reason to talk about the Broncos tight ends. They have not given us anything whatsoever to consider at the tight end position. Albert O, we've been talking about late round tight end draft selections. We've been busts on the season. Well, Albert O is definitely up there. On the other side of things, I do like Gerald Everett this week, especially since this is a week where we're without a couple tight ends on the bye. I've got an asterisk here, though, because it is a bit of a tough matchup, and really the Broncos are kind of middle of the pack against opposing tight ends, but overall this defense is just really good. So I don't know if I see a crazy high ceiling for Everett, who had his worst performance of the year in week 5 against Cleveland at 1.2 fantasy points, but he still comes in as your tight end 9 in full PPR, your tight end 7 in standard scoring formats. So I think if you don't have better options, you can continue to roll with Gerald Everett, but just kind of temper your expectations. I don't see a crazy high ceiling for Everett here in week 6. That'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button if you are new to the channel. We put our free daily fantasy football content. It really does help us out when you guys hit that like and consider subscribing. Check out all of our links down below, and please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here at the catch.